This episode of the Quality Impact podcast is proudly sponsored by Catalyst Consulting, specialists in Lean Six Sigma, operational excellence, and business transformation solutions. Catalyst Consulting helps organizations achieve lasting success through customized training, consultancy, and support.
Welcome to Quality Impact, a podcast from the Chartered Quality Institute. I'm your host, Rashad Isa, chairman of the TQI. In this episode, we're focusing on managing risks in the food sector. Caitlin MacArthur is a safety executive at Sodexo with over 26 years of experience in the industry. Caitlin began her career as a management trainee in 1984, gaining hands-on experience in kitchens where food safety standards were far from today's norms. Friday Pie being a prime example. After 16 years of expanding operations, she shifted to food safety training to highlight why such practices need to change. Since then, Caitlin has worked as a food safety auditor and now leads a safety campaign. Hello, Caitlin.
Hello.
I am excited for this conversation. Food safety impacts all of us wherever we are on this planet. So why don't we start with the biggest risks in food safety today?
Okay, in my opinion, I think that they are quite often allergen orientated in this day and age. And when I say that, I mean it in that people who have allergens that are outside of the 14 recognised ones that we all probably know quite well. And it's a risk because sometimes they don't even know they're allergic to them. And also the ingredients, if they're outside of those 14, aren't as well noted on packaging, etc. I think the other element, particularly in our business, is ensuring that all PPDS products, which is pre-packed for direct sale, are labelled correctly, when each of our sites may have so many local variances depending on where they are in the UK and Ireland. So even though we do have a central catalogue which helps, you do still need to provide those elements of differences within different regions. And then I think one of the other elements is unintentional cross-contamination of raw materials in our supply chain. Earlier in the year, we had mustard that was contaminated with a peanut protein, which caused a problem industry-wide when, there was products out there that had peanuts in them, but it wasn't noted. Yeah, I think, in my opinion, I think that's where I'd go with biggest risks.
And it impacts all of us. So
Yes.
Any slight error, or as you say, slight contamination, will have a huge impact on society.
Yes.
What role do international standards play in food risk management?
I strongly believe that although some people fight against different standards, they're all in place to minimise the risks of food contamination. They're there to prevent foodborne illnesses and ultimately safeguard our consumers. Now, Sodexo has food safety leads in all of our regions and we work globally. And I think that's one way that we help with these international standards. We also make sure that we work with all of the UK primary authorities as well, which also helps us to recognise good food safety processes and practices. So yeah, they play a big part in our organisation for sure and help us guide and advise all of our team members that manage food.
You did mention that Sodexo have food safety lead in all regions. So how does Sodexo ensure food safety across all of its operations and supply chains globally? What role do those safety leads play?
Oh, they play an absolute critical role. And we do have somebody that heads them up globally as well that helps with that cohesion between all the different regions. But every site is subject to checks, both ones that they do and ones that will be done externally. We have standards, we have levels of competency within all of our teams that manage food. We issue regular updates. We learn from issues that have happened in other similar industries. We make sure that we have best practice wherever possible. And I think if we go back to the beginning, our suppliers play a huge part in this. And we have a very strict supplier onboarding process as well to make sure that our suppliers are going to help with that first step of the food safety journey. because a lot of what we have to manage is before they even arrive at our establishments, there needs to be that confidence in the supply chain. So we work tirelessly to make sure our supply chain is absolutely spot on.
And with the supply chain, other than the onboarding process, which you mentioned is robust from the starting point to bring them basically on board all of your safety checks, what other activities do you work with your supply chain after they've been onboarded to maintain that level of safety?
Every supplier is subject to a regular via one of our team. I used to be heavily involved in supplier audits. I used to really enjoy it, getting out there and seeing how the food was produced. We also as well use accredited food safety organisations like BRC and SALSA and ISO. There is others, but they're the ones that come to mind. So there'd be an element of a prerequisite with our suppliers to make sure that we were getting off on the right journey. But to me, the key thing is partnership. It's working together with the suppliers to ensure that they understand what our processes are, we understand what their processes are. And if ever an issue does arise, you can resolve it quickly, effectively, with the minimum disruption and risk to the business. It's absolutely critical. They need to have that sort of partnership, that critical friend rather than big stick approach is what I like to look at it as.
Absolutely. Quality management is more about empowerment, not about policing. That's how you drive people to do the best. And whether you have an onboarding program or you work with accreditations and accrediting bodies, and you have audit in place, it all goes down to people on both ends, on Sodexo and on your entire supply chain. People play an important role and you need to get the buy-in. So how does the leadership team on both ends, supply chain and Sodexo, work to foster that kind of culture of strong food safety?
So if I talk about the supply chain element first, because that works slightly differently, within our procurement team, there is links to various different specialist buying people. So you'd have your fresh meat and fresh veg, and they'd all be specialists in that area. And they work really closely with our suppliers to make sure that we've got the right standards in place. And then and that works really well. And then if I move to more sort of the leadership within our on-site teams, now I'm not sure, probably a lot of people listening to this will only realise this, but leaders have a 70% impact on their team's behaviour at work. And that is absolutely crucial. So the programme that I've been working with recently is all about ensuring that leadership is good, that it's visible, it's consistent, and that they realise that if they don't follow a process or make sure or try and miss a step in the food safety element, that they're automatically giving their team the right to do the same. I know it's an old saying, but that leading by example and making sure that example is a good example is absolutely key to that leadership, because it's got to be a good example else. It just doesn't work. So yeah, it's empowerment for sure. I love that word and it's very true.
And this is what we expect from leaders of organizations as well. So as quality professionals, what would we need to provide leaders to support them to ensure that they are being visible and consistent, so as they drive the safety message, the improvement message, the assurance message?
Yeah.
How can we help them?
Oh, and we do need to help them. It's tough out there in this world, particularly in the catering. So I have my view is that you've absolutely got to make sure that you provide the right standards so that they're very clear all the way through, whatever it is, from whether you are accepting a delivery or whether it's the way in which you cook a chicken, for example. And then I think you've then got to make sure that when those standards are clear, that they're all very aware of the expectations from that organisational body. Because I actually think that your teams, when you're managing inside, they see you as that leadership element, don't they? And so it's like a domino effect, isn't there? If that first domino isn't standing up straight and tall and very clear about what you expect, the ultimate element the ultimate impact is not going to look how we want it to look, which is great food on a plate being served by great people.
Thank you very much for that. If I shift gears right now, Caitlin, and talk about the emerging risks and how we can continue putting food safety at the heart of what we do, are there any new regulations helping shape up the food industries?
I mentioned just briefly about PPDS. That's a new way of thinking. And what that meant was that all packaging had to be very descriptive around what it contained. And it also added to it, if you were serving things on a regular basis, it also had to display calories as well. Now, whilst this offered information for consumers, which is great, it's really good that they get to manage their diet and the calories and what's in the product, really helps them to make that really informed choice. What it did do was place additional obligations on food businesses to have that infrastructure and that method for helping to make sure that that labelling was correct. And I think that it's been in a little while, but it is one of the later, newer regulations. And I think it is slowly but surely it's getting better and better. And there's been some great best practice guidance on when you are packaging food and non-packaged food, particularly for allergen information. And I think that's really helping to shape the industry and enhance that consumer protection, which is what we want to do. We want to make sure that the consumer enjoys their food with no other consequences, no other poor consequences. They can have lots of good ones, but not poor ones.
Yeah, absolutely. To enjoy it and remain healthy without any health issues.
Yeah.
So with those, I know the PPD you mentioned is one of the newest one, but with food safety professionals in the market today, what skills and competencies do they need to continue to be relevant in supporting the profession in the future?
It's really interesting that you asked that question, because our team on the ground still need the same level of qualifications. They need to have a good food safety background. They need to be competent to know all of the risks and manage them. They need to have a good understanding of a hazard process, hazard analysis, critical control. They need all of that. I don't think that's changed. But what the FSA is doing has been consulting on food law code of practice. And this proposal means different levels of training needed for officers to inspect, for your EHO officers that come out to check and give ratings in the UK and Ireland. And this will aim to ensure a broader pool of food safety professionals to target that risk. And it adds that key competency that will help continue to grow with the importance of skill and technology. So I just think it's really interesting that although everything has changed and nothing has changed, that that body of people is looking to see how they can also offer that help and advice. And again, critical friend rather than the big stick. So, yeah.
Absolutely. The critical friend is important, but because it all goes down to people, I have a personal experience, which is not necessarily relating to prepackaged food, but in general, if you go to a restaurant to have a meal, now all restaurants in the UK immediately ask you on whether you have any allergies that they need to be aware of. Now, I have an allergy to one food item that's not part of the allergen, so it will never
you
be.
resonate with me then. Yes.
Totally.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I'm one of those people who are allergic to avocado, which is something I really like, but I can't eat. And avocado is not listed on the allergen.
No.
Now, when I go to restaurants, it's very well controlled, but what allergies do you have? The experience I get depends on the restaurant. Hence why it depends on people. In one instance, you get somebody that brings me their report of all of the allergens, and you can say, you need to read and then decide accordingly. And another restaurant, you get somebody that comes and talks to me and says, what is it exactly you're allergic to? Let me check with the chef. I'll make sure we can. So those are two completely different experiences for potentially sometimes the same dish that I'm eating in different restaurants. How does that level of people, that critical friend, cascade down across the business to make sure people, I know it's a sensitive topic, are not always afraid to approach it, that they feel they can actually engage with another human being about their allergies?
And you're absolutely right. You are going to get different experiences in everywhere. And I think sometimes people are so tuned into the 14 recognised I don't like to call them top allergens, the ones that are more common, I suppose, within people.
Yeah.
Most common, yeah. And I think that you've got to start with that good leadership approach to it, haven't you? The organisation has to set the way in which we need to work with this. Now, within our organisation, we work within schools. So we're probably working with an audience as well that is not, you can't do that, sit and talk to it. You've got to have had that information provided to you by somebody who's looking after them. I don't like parent, for example, but where we do work within areas that you can have that interaction, that is exactly what we would endeavour to do. Because like you said, it's not until the chef needs to be made aware that they've got a customer there that can't have a certain product. If he doesn't know what he doesn't know, he can't make sure that meal's safe for you. So we have special meal requirement processes to make sure it's documented. We make sure that somebody else double checks it, because in a catering environment, it can be really quick. It can be really fast. So yeah, but it comes down to setting the stall out right, doesn't it? And actually having that conversation with somebody is going to give you reassurance and also help to make sure that we get it right. The folder element and handing you the folder, it can work, but probably wouldn't list avocado. Again, that's got to be a conversation, hasn't it?
Yes, it is a people skill. It is a people skill.
And so it's really important.
Those regulations should help, but should not be the only way that, you just read a leaflet.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. Let's look now into some practical steps as well for quality and safety professionals. How can organizations in the food industry build a proactive risk management culture?
As I've already mentioned about our suppliers, because they are absolutely key. They're sending in all the food, aren't they, that we use. But again, I think that has got to work with open and honest communication. I think that as well as our partnerships with our suppliers, we're a contractor. So we need a really good supplier with our clients as well, in order to make sure that we're working and we know everything we need to know from their perspective to help work with them to have that risk culture in place. Again, you've got to have the minimum standards, and you've got to have a team that wants to exceed those minimum standards. But the minimum standards has to be your baseline. And I also think that you've got to involve the team. And I think that you've got to also have a sort of a culture where people are happy to speak up. And I call it a psychological safe environment, candor to do the right thing, or whatever terminology you want. But I think that if that safe environment is not in place, then you're going to really struggle with that risk culture or getting the risk culture right, because people will sweep stuff under the carpet or just be worried for whatever reason, fear of losing their job, maybe fear of repercussions. So it's got to be really open and really honest, and in order to help with that, have that proactive, stop things before they escalate. Yeah, it's really important.
And I like that you refer to standards as they are the minimum standards of how we need to operate. So they are the minimum standards. And I know you talked about audits and site visits to your suppliers and to production facilities and so on, but we are talking about minimum standards and audits. I'm interested to know more about, from your experience, how do these inspections and minimum standards drive improvement in all of those areas?
Okay, I can only talk about my organisation because very sadly, I don't know how many decades now, but it's far too many to even mention. What we have is we have a tiered process. So it starts with a check at the front line, the production side of it. It then moves to asking their line manager to do a check at T2. We then have a central team that checks at tier 3. And then we have, which is more, even though we all work for the same company, it's still external to that particular workplace. And then to top that, we have a tier 4, which is we use external accreditors in order to help us to achieve that. The one we currently use is Issaquah, and they come out and then they'll choose who they want to check to make sure that all those layers are in place. We've recently tried to move a little bit away from a lot of the manual side of it, and we've moved to more of an electronic checking system, because what that does is it gives you a view whether you're on site or not. So it helps to if you go in and you have a look at a site and you see there's a trend or there's something not quite right, or even that the checklist hasn't been completed, you can start to go, okay, let's talk to the tier 2 level and see what's going on. And then if that's not giving us the answers we want, let's go in at tier 3. But I wrote an article actually for CQI about whether you should go in unannounced or announced. And I'm a big advocate of an announced audit, because I think that gives you that more critical friend approach. They know you're coming, they can find the time to talk to you. It's not a shock horror when you turn up at the door, do you know? And I think that helps with that, them seeing the audit as a support rather than some form of, report that they're not going to like to read. It's got to be about the support.
There are two approaches. One is, hopefully we'll get to a day in our life where you can visit an establishment unannounced and there will be no shock and horror, because they know you are a critical friend and you're not a police person who is just going to mark them. So that's one bit. But the other bit about having an announced audit, so letting them know that you're coming, there is nothing wrong with that approach. If an establishment or a team knew that an inspector is coming and they wanted to put their best on show to make sure everything is adherence, then you know their best is a baseline. If they can do it one day, they can do it every day. So it is a win-win approach in however you tackle it. But hopefully, one day, an unannounced visit is no longer a shock horror visit for people. We're working towards that.
And it's not just in the food industry, is it? It's in every industry that kind of, somebody comes to check you, you want people to say, oh, I'm glad you've come. Can you answer this question? Or can you just check that this process is absolutely sitting where it needs to be? And are we there yet? I'd love to think so. Am I being realistic or not? I'm not sure. But it is about that culture of, I want to do this because I recognise the risk rather than I have to, which is that policing safety mentality, which is going to get us nowhere. And it's really hard work to police safety as well. It's
absolutely.
It's managing rather than leading, isn't it? It's not as...
Yes, I do understand absolutely, it's not productive. And I do understand the requirement to actually make sure you go through your standards and you perform audits for the safety of society as well. We're talking about food over here. Yeah. But in general, I've always approached audits as an opportunity to highlight best practices.
Yes.
Come and show me how you do this the best it can be done, so as others can learn. And that mindset shifts from a policing approach into actually a business partner that can help drive and highlight success stories that everybody can learn from.
When I was in the audit team, which wasn't that long ago, I used to go in and I'll go, show me all the fantastic things you're doing, prove that you're going to get 100%. And if they did, then that was fabulous. But if there was things that they decided to prove to me that wasn't quite right, then you just got to help them to put it right. And that was how, But every audit I went in was 100% pass unless they decided that they were going to show me any different. In which case, you've got to help them to guide them to doing the right thing. With those, absolutely, work with them. The great people out there, we've got great teams. And I don't think anybody comes into work to do a bad job, do they? People come to work to do a good job, but sometimes challenges and opportunities make that hard.
Yes. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, today I'm going to work and I'm going to intentionally do a bad job and a careless. Nobody does that. Absolutely.
No.
Caitlin, Sodexo was ranked in the top 2% amongst 150,000 companies in the EcoVadis 2024 assessment. Can you share more about the sustainability initiatives by the company in the food services to reduce its environmental footprint and also promote ethical and inclusive practices?
Oh, that is a big question, isn't it? It's a really big question. I'm really proud of what we've done, because we work with our suppliers, as I've probably mentioned a lot, and we have to work with our clients as well, because we are governed a little bit about what happens on their sites. our business has been on a really great journey, and we're actively tackling the impacts that we potentially have on the climate. And we've been doing this for a long time. We've had a partnership for a decade with the WWF, and they've helped us supported us in measuring and reducing our carbon footprint, for one. We've done practical things like combined deliveries. So we'll have a main supplier who will also deliver other suppliers on the same truck. I think there's a technical name for it, but I can't remember what it is. We've set ambitions and targets in order to achieve net zero by no later than 2040. And I know there's a lot of government aims and goals within that as well. We set a baseline in 2017 that covered various scopes, as we called them. So scope 1 was emissions that relate to those emissions that Sodexo makes directly, including the fuel we use in the vehicles and heat in our offices. They've done a big move to electric cars to help with that. Scope 2 is emissions that refer to the indirect emissions from the generation of the purchased electricity, such as powering offices again. And then we add scope 3, which refers to the indirect emissions that occur in Sodexo's value chain, including our supply chain, business travel, employee commuting, and where we manage, within some instances, we actually manage the client site and waste facilities. And this has all made and moved us in absolutely the right direction. So in 2022, our business became the first food service and one of the first organisations globally to have both near and long-term science-based targets validated by the initiative SBTi. And it's really helped us to prioritise our sustainability and strategy towards endeavouring to do everything we can to help with sustainability going forward. We carry on with a comprehensive roadmap, which is managed by our team with that aim to reach that net zero by 2040. So yeah, very proud of what we've done and really keen to see what it will look like in the future. I hope that answers that question for you.
It does indeed. This conversation today, we talked about leadership being visible, consistent, and leading by good example. We talked about the standards being the minimum starting point and the quality professional and safety professionals being more of a critical friend to support people to do their best. Any final thoughts or advice you'd like to give to our listeners?
I think that where I came from was a passion to just do the right thing. And in my really early days, I saw things like the Friday pie that you mentioned. And I'm not even going to go into any detail around what a Friday pie is. I'm going to leave that to your listeners' imagination. But I think that I have just have the passion, have the will to want to do it right, have the will to want to get it right and provide really great food and service. I think that's the key as well. You need the food and then you need the great service so that they partnership each other. And we've got some fantastic facilities out there, both in Sodexo and outside in the UK and Ireland. And I just urge them all to carry on doing what they're doing because I love my food and I love it all even more when I know I'm eating safe food.
Thank you to Caitlin MacArthur for joining us on this episode of Quality Impact. Thanks to our producer, Luke Nixon. Please subscribe, download, follow, and leave us a review. We appreciate you tuning in. I was your host, Rashad Issa, and as always, see you next month.